You know what is genuinely rare in modern Australia? Towns where teenagers are not glued to phones because there is barely any reception. Towns where the pub is still the actual centre of community life, not a gastropub serving $32 Wagyu burgers to tourists. Towns where the main street looks exactly like it did when your grandparents were young, not preserved as museums, not heritage marketed for Instagram, just unchanged, because nobody got around to changing them. These towns exist, they are affordable, and they have preserved something most Australians think is gone forever. Let's get into it. Wait until you see number 1, because it literally appeared on the Australian $10 note as an image of historic Australia, and somehow still looks exactly the same nearly 60 years later. At number 12, we have Nil in Victoria. Population approximately 2,100. It sits about 375 kilometres from Melbourne in the Wimmera wheat belt. Median house price sits between $180,000 and $250,000. Here's what makes Nil genuinely special. The town has an Art Deco cinema called the Nil Theatre that has been screening films on weekends since 1936. Same building, same format, original seating, manual ticketing. They still do an interval where they sell choc tops from a cart. That is not a recreation. That is just how they have always done it. The main street along Victoria Street features original 1920s through 1960s shop fronts, hand-painted signs, verandas extending over footpaths, a family bakery that has been operating with the same recipes since the 1950s, a butcher with handwritten price tags, pubs serving counter meals at prices that would make Melbourne weep. There are no traffic lights. Wednesday afternoon closing is still observed by some businesses. The CWA remains active and influential. The football club functions as the genuine social centre of the entire community. I talked to a third-generation farmer in his late 60s who has lived there his entire 67 years. He told me his grandfather would recognise this main street. The signs have faded, the cars have changed, but the bones are identical. The pub is in the same spot. The bank is in the same spot. Even the arguments at the football club are about the same things. The trade-off is genuine isolation. Hot, dry summers, limited entertainment. Young people leave for education and careers. Specialist services require significant travel to Horsham or Melbourne. But for retirees seeking affordable, quiet living, families wanting kids raised in small-town Australia, or remote workers wanting genuine rural life, Nil delivers. A working Wimmera wheat town that never tried to be anything else, and that preserved itself completely by accident. Number 11, Peterborough in South Australia. Population approximately 1,800. About 250 kilometres from Adelaide, roughly 3 hours drive. Median house price sits between $120,000 and $200,000. Some heritage workers' cottages cost even less. Here is what makes Peterborough remarkable. This town was built by railways. When railways were the arteries of Australia, Peterborough was a major junction. The infrastructure remains: magnificent stone railway buildings, an original roundhouse and turntable that are not just preserved, but fully operational. Steam locomotives are maintained and run by volunteers who remember when this was how Australia moved. The main street features solid colonial architecture, stone buildings from the 1880s through the 1950s, and Art Deco shop fronts with original tiling. Traditional bakeries still use original ovens. Hardware stores sell stock that genuinely has not moved since the 1970s. Everything closes on Sunday. The town empties at lunch. There are no traffic lights anywhere. I spoke with a former railway worker who is now a heritage volunteer in his early 70s. He arrived as a young railway worker in 1971 and never left. He told me this town was built by railways, and when the railways left, everyone expected it to die. But it just went quiet instead, and stayed exactly as it was. The buildings are still here. The pubs are still here. The roundhouse still works. They just do everything slower now. The trade-off is population decline and very limited employment. There is some genuine sadness in a town past its prime. But for retirees wanting affordable heritage character, railway enthusiasts, history lovers, or people who do not need much and appreciate what they have, Peterborough delivers. A railway town frozen at the moment the trains stopped being important, preserved in stone and steam. At number 10, Chiltern in Victoria. Population approximately 1,200. It is about 275 kilometres from Melbourne and just 30 kilometres from Wangaratta. Median house price between $380,000 and $500,000, rising due to proximity to Beechworth. Here is the thing about Chiltern. The main street, Conness Street, is a virtually intact Gold Rush streetscape. Not restored, not reconstructed, just never changed. You can walk into a pharmacy operating in an original building from the 1860s with vintage fittings and buy aspirin. The Athenaeum Hall has been functioning since 1866. The Star Hotel still has its original structure from the 1860s. This town feels unchanged. Verandas cast sharp shadows on the footpaths. Original painted signs have faded to pastels. Wooden hitching posts are still visible in some places. The general store has wooden floors and pressed tin ceilings. There are no traffic lights, and the main street is often empty of cars. Shops operate on flexible schedules that basically mean when we are open. I talked to a woman in her early 60s who retired from Melbourne and moved there 8 years ago. She said she visited once, walked down the main street, and felt like she had time travelled. Not to a museum, but to an actual place that just kept going when everywhere else changed. She bought a house 6 months later. She loves the complete absence of pretense. The buildings are old because they are old, not because someone restored them for tourists. The trade-off is prices rising as word spreads. Very limited local services and no local employment. But for heritage enthusiasts, remote workers, or history lovers wanting character without extreme isolation, Chiltern delivers a gold rush streetscape that somehow kept being a normal town while everywhere else became heritage marketed or modernised. Number 9. Junee in New South Wales. Population approximately 4,500. About 450 kilometres from Sydney. Just 40 kilometres from Wagga Wagga. Median house price between $280,000 and $380,000. Here is what makes Junee genuinely interesting. It was a grand railway town, and the architecture still reflects that former importance, with Art Deco buildings and Victorian facades. The Junee Railway Roundhouse is one of only 2 operational railway roundhouses in New South Wales, where volunteers maintain and run historic locomotives in original 1940s era infrastructure. The main street features wide roads lined with grand buildings from the railway heyday. Railway influence appears everywhere in the architecture, the layout, and the scale of buildings designed for a more important place. Traditional bakeries still operate. Old-style pubs maintain original fittings. Hardware stores have remained unchanged for decades. I spoke with a couple in their late 50s, sea changers from Sydney, who moved 6 years ago. They said they could have gone to the coast like everyone else, but they drove through Junee once and saw this beautiful town that Sydney had completely forgotten about. Houses for $250,000 that would cost $1.5 million in any coastal town. Same heritage, same character, and no crowds. They loved the sense that they discovered something, the community involvement, and the affordability that let them retire 10 years early. The trade-off is isolation from Sydney, limited local employment beyond basic services, hot dry summers, and dependence on Wagga for many services. But for retirees wanting heritage and affordability, for families wanting a safe country town with actual services, or for commuters to Wagga wanting a rural lifestyle, Junee delivers. A grand railway town that never got the memo about modernisation and that preserved itself through benign neglect. At number 8, Burra in South Australia. Population approximately 1,100. About 160 kilometres from Adelaide, roughly 2 hours drive. Median house prices range between $220,000 and $350,000 for heritage cottages. Here is what you need to understand about Burra. This was once Australia's largest inland town. The mining boom of the 1850s created something extraordinary, and somehow it just stayed. The entire streetscape is stone. Buildings that look like they were carved from the earth, because the same local stone was used for everything. The miners' dugouts at Burra Creek are the signature feature. Over 1,800 people once lived in homes carved into the creek banks. You can still enter these dugouts and understand how people actually lived in the 1850s. Wide streets with verandah shops. Absolute silence when no cars pass. Wind through the heritage ruins. Crows calling. Your own footsteps echoing off stone walls. I talked to a retired teacher in his late 60s who moved from Adelaide 12 years ago. He told me people visit the Clare Valley wineries and completely miss Burra. That suits them perfectly. They have this heritage town practically to themselves. The dugouts, the mine ruins, the stone buildings. In any other country, this would be a UNESCO site, with queues around the block. He loves living in genuine history, buying a stone cottage for less than a suburban Adelaide unit. The quality of light and stone. The trade-off is very limited services locally. No hospital nearby. Employment is almost non-existent. Hot, dry summers, cold, dry winters. But for history enthusiasts, retirees wanting affordable heritage living, or writers and artists seeking atmosphere and solitude, Burra delivers. A stone monument to the 1850s mining boom that somehow never got around to being demolished, developed, or even properly discovered. Number 7. Ross in Tasmania. Population approximately 350. Ross is about 120 kilometres from Hobart and 80 kilometres from Launceston. It sits right on the Midland Highway. Median house prices range between $400,000 and $600,000 for heritage cottages, because the Tasmanian heritage premium is real. Here is what makes Ross genuinely extraordinary. The Ross Bridge was carved between 1831 and 1836 by convict stonemason Daniel Herbert. It features 186 intricate carvings and is arguably the finest convict-built structure in Australia. People drive through Ross every single day on the Midland Highway. Most do not stop. Those 200,000 cars a year pass within metres of one of Australia's most significant heritage structures without slowing down. That indifference is precisely what preserved the town. The village is a complete Georgian and Victorian streetscape with honey-coloured sandstone buildings, English trees lining the streets, low walls and hedges, and church spires reaching above the rooflines. The Ross Village Bakery operates in an 1860s building. The Man O' Ross Hotel has been operating since 1835, making it one of Australia's oldest continually licensed hotels. The village crossroads carries a tradition naming each direction. Temptation is the pub. Salvation is the church. Recreation is the town hall. Damnation was the jail. Picture this. You wake up and look at a bridge carved by a convict in 1836. You buy bread from a bakery that has been operating longer than some countries have existed. Your cottage was built when Queen Victoria was young, and 90% of the cars driving through on the highway do not even slow down to see any of it. I spoke with an artist in her early 50s who moved from Melbourne 10 years ago. She told me exactly this. She loves the complete authenticity, the light, the silence, and the fact that it genuinely has not changed because there is no pressure for it to change. The trade-off is almost no services in the village, higher property prices than mainland equivalents, a very small community where everyone knows everything, Tasmania's island isolation, and cold winters. You need to drive to Campbelltown or Oatlands for basics, and to Launceston or Hobart for anything serious. This requires total commitment to village life. But for history enthusiasts who want to live in heritage rather than just visit it, for artists and writers seeking atmosphere, and for retirees comfortable driving for all services, Ross delivers something almost impossible to find elsewhere. A perfect Georgian village that 200,000 cars a year drive past without stopping, preserved entirely by indifference. Number 6. Sofala in New South Wales. Population approximately 200, about 250 kilometres from Sydney, just 45 kilometres from Bathurst. Median house price varies dramatically given the tiny market, somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 for cottages and houses. Tiny market. Here is what you need to understand about Sofala. This is Australia's oldest surviving gold town. The main street is an almost complete wooden frontier town streetscape. Not restored, not maintained for tourists, it just survived. Timber buildings with corrugated iron roofs. Wooden verandas extending over the dirt edges of sealed roads. The Royal Hotel has been operating continuously with original character since the gold rush. People still drink there. People still collect their mail at the post office building that looks exactly as it did in the 1860s. The Timber Main Street looks like a Western movie set, except it is real. This town once had over 40 pubs. Now, only a handful of buildings remain. Ruins stand beside functioning structures. The general store has pressed tin ceilings and wooden floors. There is no ATM. There is no petrol station in town. Phone reception is absent in some areas. The only accommodation is the pub and basic camping. You hear the Turon River, wind in eucalypts, kookaburras, and occasionally someone's generator. Not much else. Time stopped here in 1862 and only occasionally remembers to tick forward. I talked to a retired couple in their 70s who moved from Sydney 15 years ago. Their Sydney friends said they were mad. They said they were buying a timber cottage in Australia's oldest surviving gold town for less than their car cost. 15 years later, they still walk down to the pub on Fridays. They still pan for gold in the river for fun. They still cannot quite believe this place exists. They love the absolute authenticity. Nothing reconstructed, nothing preserved for tourists, it just survived. They accept having no services at all. They go to Bathurst for everything. Medical emergencies are a genuine concern given the distance. The trade-off is almost no services or infrastructure. The property market is extremely small, making it hard to buy and hard to sell. This suits almost no one. It suits people seeking isolation, history, enthusiasts who want immersion, retirees comfortable with extreme self-reliance, and artists wanting atmospheric solitude. Everyone else should look elsewhere. A wooden gold rush town that survived by being too poor to demolish and too remote to gentrify. Survived. Ravenswood in Queensland. Population approximately 200, about 1,200 kilometres from Brisbane and roughly 90 kilometres from Townsville. Median house prices range between $50,000 and $150,000 for houses, though the market is tiny. Here is the thing about Ravenswood. The cemetery contains over 2,000 graves for a town that never exceeded 4,500 living residents. That mortality rate tells you everything about the gold rush. Mining disasters killed hundreds, cave-ins, floods, and silicosis. The graves kept filling while the town kept shrinking. At its peak in 1903, Ravenswood had 4,500 people. Today, about 200 remain. That is a 95% decline in population. But the architecture remained. The main street feels like a fever dream of Australian gold rush architecture. Two-story buildings with iron lace verandas, original painted signage still visible, ruins standing beside functioning buildings. Two original Victorian-era pubs still operate. The Imperial Hotel and the Railway Hotel maintain original bars, pressed tin ceilings, and timber floors. They serve cold beers to a population that has shrunk 95%, but absolutely refuses to disappear completely. You hear extreme quiet, broken by crows, occasionally by mining exploration trucks, and by the generator at the pub. The absence of sound itself becomes notable. This feels like visiting a town that has been slowly exhaling for 120 years. Each decade, a bit more breath leaves, but it has not quite stopped yet. I spoke with the publican at the Imperial Hotel. He was in his late 50s and had run the pub for 15 years. He told me people ask why he stays in a town of 200 in the middle of nowhere. He says he owns a pub that is a museum, except it is still operating. He pours beers where miners stood in 1890. He lives in one of the most authentic pieces of Australia that exist. You cannot buy that in a city. He loves the history you can touch, the absolute freedom, the silence, and the regular visitors who become friends over years. He accepts isolation that most people could not handle. That means hours of driving for basic supplies, no medical care nearby, and a community so small that everyone depends on everyone else completely. The trade-off is extreme isolation. No services whatsoever. Brutal heat in summer. Population decline means an uncertain future. Medical emergencies require travel to Charters Towers or Townsville. This is the outback. Genuine remoteness that only suits people who have genuinely assessed their tolerance for isolation. A gold rush town that lost 95% of its population but kept its architecture and refuses to become a ghost town. Kew, in Western Australia, has a population of approximately 200. It is about 650 kilometres from Perth, roughly 7 hours drive. It sits just 80 kilometres from Meekatharra. Median house prices range between $30,000 and $100,000, though the market is extremely limited. This is what makes Kew genuinely surreal. The town was built for 10,000 people. Now 200 live there. Buildings designed for a gold rush city of thousands now serve a village. The Gentlemen's Club building alone could house the entire current population. It is like discovering a miniature city in the desert. Grand Victorian buildings stand in the red desert with almost no one around. The Queen of the Murchison Hotel is one of Western Australia's grand country pubs, operating in a magnificent original building that would be the centerpiece of any capital city heritage precinct. Government buildings remain from when Kew was a major goldfield centre. The Masonic Lodge maintains original fittings. Stone and brick structures dwarf the current population in their ambition and scale. You hear the wind, possibly the loneliest wind in Australia. Crows calling, mining trucks occasionally passing through. The vast silence of the Murchison region. The atmosphere is magnificent desolation, and there is a deep pride in survival. The town was briefly important and has spent 120 years gracefully accepting reduced circumstances. Change happens across decades, not days. The town measures time in generations of miners coming and going. I talked to a third-generation resident in his late 60s whose family arrived during the gold rush. He told me his grandmother remembered 10,000 people. He remembered 500. Now there are 200. The buildings remember all of it. They stay because this is home and because someone needs to keep the memory alive. When he walks past the Gentlemen's Club building, he passes his family's entire history. He loves the absolute freedom, the stars without light pollution, the history that is in every stone. He takes pride in being one of the people who kept it going when others left. He accepts that everything requires planning. Medical emergencies mean calling the Royal Flying Doctor Service. Young people leave. They might be the last generation. The trade-off is extreme isolation. Kew is genuinely remote in ways most Australians cannot comprehend. Brutal heat in summer. Medical care dependent on the Royal Flying Doctor Service. An uncertain future given population decline. This way of life only suits very specific personalities. People seeking complete escape, history enthusiasts comfortable with extreme conditions, and retirees with health good enough for outback living. Everyone else should look elsewhere. A grand gold rush city that shrunk to a village, but kept its Victorian buildings as monuments to what it briefly was. Number 3, Maldon in Victoria. Population approximately 1,500. Just 135 kilometres from Melbourne, about an hour and a half drive. Only 18 kilometres from Castlemaine, 40 kilometres from Bendigo. Median house price between $550,000 and $750,000 because of a heritage premium and its proximity to Melbourne. Here is why Maldon ranks this high. In 1966, Australia declared Maldon its first notable town, specifically because nothing had changed. 58 years later, still nothing has changed. Not one modern shopfront, not one chain store, not one building that breaks the streetscape. The complete absence of visible modernity in the town centre is the signature feature. The main street looks like walking into a photograph from 1890. Every single building is from the gold rush era. Verandas creating continuous shelter. Original painted signs on shop fronts. Wooden shop doors that creak when opened. No plastic signage anywhere. Penny School Lollies sells old-fashioned sweets in a heritage building. The Maldon Hotel operates as an unchanged gold rush pub. Traditional bakeries bake in original buildings. A heritage steam train runs to Castlemaine. The atmosphere is pride in preservation. Active maintenance of heritage, not passive decay. A community that chose to keep its character and succeeded through sheer stubbornness. I spoke with a historical society member in her 70s who has lived there for 45 years. After moving from Melbourne, she told me they fought for this. When developers wanted to widen the main street in the 1960s, they stopped them. When someone wanted to build a service station in the town centre, they stopped them. Every year, someone has a great idea for modernisation. They stop them. That is why Maldon still looks like this. She loves living in something they saved, knowing that her grandchildren will see what she sees, being part of a community that values heritage over profit. She accepts being called difficult, obstructionist, anti-progress. She prefers preservationist. The town survives because they said no often enough. The trade-off is high property prices compared to similar-sized towns. Heritage restrictions that frustrate some property owners. Tourism crowds on weekends and during the folk festival. Limited employment locally. The risk of feeling preserved rather than alive at times. But for heritage enthusiasts willing to pay a premium. For retirees wanting character without extreme isolation. For Melbourne commuters or remote workers wanting country living with substance, Maldon delivers something extraordinary. Australia's first notable town, preserved since 1966 by a community that decided modernity could go elsewhere. Number 2, Silverton in New South Wales. Population approximately 50, about 1,100 kilometres from Sydney, just 25 kilometres from Broken Hill. Median house price between $100,000 and $300,000 for habitable properties in a very limited market. Here is what makes Silverton extraordinary. The population peaked at 3,000. Now, 50 people remain. The Silverton Hotel is perhaps Australia's most photographed outback pub. It has appeared in more films than most Australian actors, including Mad Max and The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, as well as countless commercials. Films use Silverton because nothing needs to be built. It already looks like a movie set. Post-apocalyptic beauty. Red dirt stretches to the horizon. The blue sky is so intense it almost hurts. Stone buildings stand either intact or as dignified ruins. The kind of place that makes photographers weep with joy and casual visitors question their life choices. The main street shows frontier honesty without apology. You hear wind, endless wind across the barrier range. Crows call. A car approaches from kilometers away. The creak of the hotel door. Life here is organized around heat and light. Dawn is for doing things. Midday is for shelter. Afternoon is for waiting. Evening is for the pub. That rhythm has not changed since the miners left. I spoke with an artist who moved from Adelaide 30 years ago. She told me she came for a weekend in 1994. She bought a miner's cottage for $8,000. She has painted this landscape every day for 30 years and still has not finished seeing it. The light here is unlike anywhere else on Earth. The town gives you solitude, beauty, and a community of 50 people who all chose the same strange life. She loves the absolute clarity. No distractions, no pretense. The landscape that enters your soul if you let it. The freedom to be eccentric without anyone caring. She accepts summer heat that would kill unprepared people. The town depends completely on Broken Hill for everything. Isolation is so complete that you must choose it consciously every single day. The trade-off is extreme heat in summer, exceeding 45 degrees. Total isolation from services. A population so small that the community is extremely tight. Medical emergencies require the drive to Broken Hill. This lifestyle only suits specific personalities who have carefully considered what outback life actually means. It suits artists seeking light and landscape. People wanting complete escape from everything. Retirees comfortable with extreme conditions. Anyone who has ever looked at outback photographs and thought they wanted to live inside that image. Almost no one else. An outback frontier town of 50 people surrounded by the ruins of 3,000, preserved by distance, heat, and the artists who found beauty in desolation. At number 1, we have Goulgong in New South Wales. Population approximately 2,500, about 300 kilometres from Sydney and just 30 kilometres from Mudgee. Median house price between $320,000 and $450,000 for 3-bedroom houses. Here is why Goulgong takes the top position. In 1966, the Reserve Bank of Australia chose Goulgong to appear on the $10 note because it looked most like historic Australia. That was 58 years ago. Walk down the main street today, and you are walking through the image printed on millions of banknotes. The town still looks exactly like the photograph they chose. The main street features a continuous gold rush streetscape from the 1870s. Original verandah shops with painted signage. The Prince of Wales Opera House has been hosting performances since 1871 and still does. Traditional bakeries operate with original recipes. Pubs maintain unchanged interiors. Hardware stores have wooden floors and original stock systems. Butchers use handwritten pricing. The newsagent still feels like 1965. There are no traffic lights. Free angle parking everywhere. Everything is walkable. Shops operate on traditional hours. The town empties after 6 p.m, except for the pubs. Wednesday afternoon closing is still observed by some businesses. I talked to a retired couple in their mid-70s who moved from Sydney 12 years ago. They told me they visited Mudgee for wine, took a wrong turn, and ended up in Goulgong for lunch. They walked down the main street and the wife started crying. She said it looked exactly like the town her grandmother described from the 1940s. They made an offer on a house that afternoon. 12 years later, they walk to the bakery, they know everyone at the pub, and they watch performances at the Opera House. Their grandchildren visit and think they have time travelled. They are not wrong. Here is why Goulgong beats every other entry. Unlike smaller towns that require extreme isolation tolerance, Goulgong offers functional services including a hospital, schools, and shops while maintaining near-complete heritage character. It is more affordable than Malden, more accessible than Silverton or Kew, more alive than Ravenswood, and better serviced than Sofala. But it is equally authentic in heritage preservation. Maldon is preserved by heritage controls. Goolgoong preserved itself by simply never changing. The authenticity is accidental, which makes it more authentic. A population of 2,500 means actual community life with clubs, events, and social networks, not just heritage buildings with no one in them. The trade-off is distance from Sydney and limited specialist employment locally. Entertainment options are genuinely limited. Winters are cold, with frost common. Young people often leave for the cities. But for retirees seeking affordable heritage character, for families wanting a safe country town with actual services, for remote workers wanting a genuine tree change, or for anyone who romanticizes old Australia and wants to discover it still exists, Goolgoong delivers the complete package. So there you have it. 12 Australian towns where the 1960s pace of life didn't disappear. It just moved to places most people stopped looking. Let me be completely honest about what this lifestyle actually requires. These towns preserved themselves because they were bypassed, not because anyone planned it. The inconveniences, the absence of chains, limited internet, and distance from cities are precisely what maintain their character. Remove those inconveniences and you remove the preservation mechanism. This lifestyle suits people tired of manufactured experiences and algorithmic life. Retirees seeking genuine community over marketed lifestyle. Remote workers wanting escape without complete isolation. Families wanting children to experience old Australia. Anyone who looks at modern Australia and feels something has been lost. This lifestyle does not suit people needing constant entertainment or stimulation. Those requiring career advancement opportunities. Anyone dependent on specialist medical care. People who cannot handle limited connectivity. Those who romanticize the idea but could not handle the reality. The 1960s Australia your grandparents described, where the butcher knew your name, where shops closed on Wednesday afternoon, where kids rode bikes without helmets, and the pub was the community centre, did not disappear. It just moved to places most people stopped looking. These 12 towns prove that the pace of life everyone says is gone is actually hiding in plain sight, waiting for people who want it enough to accept what it costs. If you made it this far, subscribe for realistic Australian lifestyle content that does not pretend trade-offs do not exist. Comment which town surprised you most or which one matches what you are looking for. Like the video so the algorithm shows this to people actually seeking alternatives rather than burying it behind tourism marketing. See you in the next one.